When you think about the Beatles, you probably think about the music, right? But their story, well, it's so much bigger than that. It's really about how these four guys from a city that was, pretty beat up after the war ended up sparking this massive revolution, socially, technologically, culturally, that pretty much shaped the world we live in today. So the big question is, how on earth did they pull that off?
And this quote from John Lennon, wow, it just hits you, right? I was born on the night of October 9, 1940, when the Luftwaffe was raining bombs on Liverpool. I mean, that sets the scene perfectly. These guys didn't come from some peaceful, prosperous world. They were literally born out of the rubble, the chaos of post-war Britain. And that energy, that feeling of change, it's just baked right into their DNA from the very start.
And that's really the key to understanding them. When they exploded onto the scene, it wasn't just some disruption. It was a total reinvention of pop culture. They somehow managed to grab all that chaotic energy from the world around them and channel it into a sound, an image that nobody had ever seen or heard before. It was completely new.
So, where did it all start? Well, it wasn't with some big bang. It was more like the twang of a cheap, maybe even homemade guitar. You see, their whole journey kicked off in this really cool, uniquely British scene called skiffle. It was basically this do-it-yourself music craze, super accessible, and it gave thousands of teenagers, including our guys, their very first shot at playing rock and roll.
And if you look at how they actually came together, it's amazing how organic it was. It all started with John Lennon's little skiffle group, the Quarrymen. But the real moment, the one that literally changed music history forever, it happened at a church fete, of all places, on July 6, 1957. That's the day John Lennon met Paul McCartney. And right there, you have the songwriting partnership that was going to turn pop music completely on its head.
Okay, so they had the talent. But raw talent only gets you so far. To become that electrifying, super tight band that could take over the world, they needed something more. They needed to be forged in fire. And for the Beatles, that fire was Hamburg, Germany. And let me tell you, this was not some glamorous European tour. It was a brutal, nonstop, exhausting training ground. I mean, just look at what they went through. This was the Hamburg Gauntlet. They were playing in the red light district, living in these cold, windowless rooms behind a movie theater. They were on stage for up to 8 hours a day, pumped up on amphetamines just to stay awake. George Harrison even got deported because he was underage. It was a true crucible, a trial by fire. But that's where the magic really happened. Being forced to play for that long every single night gave them this insane stamina and huge song repertoire. It's what turned them from just a bunch of talented kids into an absolute powerhouse of a live band. Lennon even said it himself. He grew up in Hamburg, not Liverpool.
All right, so now they've got the raw talent and they've got this killer stage presence from Hamburg. What's the next piece of the puzzle? Professionalism. And that's when Brian Epstein steps into the picture. He was this local record store manager and he saw something in them. He looked past the rough leather jackets and the raw energy and saw a global phenomenon.
And this comparison right here, it says it all. You've got the before, the Hamburg look, raw leather jackets, kind of wild, smoking on stage. And then you've got the after, the Epstein look, polished, sharp suits, disciplined, and that famous synchronized bow at the end of every song. Epstein basically took that raw diamond from Hamburg and polished it for the mainstream. And that clean-cut image, it made them charming, it made them acceptable to parents, and crucially to TV producers. This was absolutely key.
So, they've got the look, they've got the sound, they've got this amazing live act. You'd think they were unstoppable, right? Well, not so fast. Before they hit the big time, they had to face one of the most legendary rejections in all of music history.
Just listen to this. Guitar groups are on the way out. The Beatles have no future in show business. Can you even imagine being the guy at Decca Records who said that in 1962? They'd just driven 10 hours through a blizzard for this audition, and that's what they get? It's probably the biggest blunder in music, but honestly, it might have been a lucky break, because that rejection pushed them right into the arms of the one producer who would totally get them, the great George Martin. So just 2 years after being told guitar groups are on the way out, this happens. 73 million people. Think about that for a second. That was more than a third of the entire population of the United States, all glued to their TVs, watching the Beatles on The Ed Sullivan Show. This wasn't just another TV gig. This was a cultural bomb going off. It kicked off the British invasion and pretty much created the whole idea of a global youth culture overnight.
But with that fame came Beatlemania. And the screaming, it was so deafening they couldn't even hear themselves play on stage. So in 1966, they did something that was just unheard of for a band at the peak of its powers. They quit touring. For good. And this radical move completely changed everything, because it freed them up to treat the recording studio less like a place to just record songs and more like their own personal science lab.
And this is where they went from being a great band to being true sonic pioneers. They stopped just recording songs and started building entire soundscapes. I mean, look at this stuff. On Tomorrow Never Knows, they're using tape loops, just little snippets of tape playing over and over, to make these wild electronic textures nobody in pop had ever heard. Or they'd record a guitar solo and then play the tape backward for this dreamy psychedelic vibe. For Eleanor Rigby, they stuck microphones right on the violins to make them sound super aggressive and raw. They were literally inventing the rules of modern music production as they went along.
Of course, all this creative freedom and pushing boundaries, it came with its share of controversy. In 1966, John Lennon made this off-the-cuff remark about the Beatles being more popular than Jesus. Well, in America, it was taken completely out of context. The backlash was insane. You had radio stations banning their music, people holding these huge public record burnings, especially in the Bible Belt. And all that stress, it was a huge part of why they decided, that's it, we're done with touring.
So they'd reached the absolute peak of creativity. But as it so often happens, the same pressures that forged them into this incredible unit were now starting to tear them apart. The final chapter of the Beatles, it's a tough story of personal, financial, and creative cracks starting to show.
When you look back, the breakup felt tragic, but maybe inevitable. It really started with the death of their manager Brian Epstein in '67. He was the glue that held them together. After he was gone, things just started to unravel. Their own company, Apple Corps, was a financial mess. Creatively, they were drifting apart, becoming more like four solo artists who just happened to be in the same room. And the final nail in the coffin was this huge fight over who should manage them, which led to Paul McCartney suing to dissolve the band in 1970. And just like that, it was over.
But here's the thing. The end of the band wasn't the end of their impact. Not even close. Just look at this number. Over 600 million. That's verified global sales. To this day, they are the best-selling band in history. And it's not even close. You just can't calculate their legacy. It's that massive.
And that's what's so incredible when you step back and look at the whole story. This amazing arc. In just one decade, they went from being the scrappy little band playing in clubs to these polished pop idols, to these avant-garde studio geniuses who completely changed the game. They didn't just play rock and roll. They blew its borders wide open and dragged the whole world along for the ride.
And that really leaves us with one big question to think about. The Beatles created this shared global experience. They united the world in a way nothing really had before. But today, in our world of a million streaming services, of fractured digital tribes and endless choice, could a cultural revolution on that scale ever happen again? Is it even possible for one thing to capture the entire world's attention like that anymore?